Uh, Hi Rohit, I think it's the time. We can start. And I'll be keeping a track of the chat. If we have any questions, you're on the go. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul. Good day, everyone. Thank you for dialing in for this talk today. Um, just before I start, let me introduce myself. I'm Rohit Gulati. I'm a senior program manager in Microsoft Identity and Network Access Engineering. And in our team, I sit in a group called as Customer and Partner Experience. So I work closely with customer and partners on Microsoft Identity Platform. What I will cover today in the next 59 minutes, I'll walk you through what Microsoft is doing in the verifiable credential space. What is DID? I'll start with that, decentralized identifier. I'm guessing some of you might have been working on this or you might have heard this term. So my intention today in the next 59 minutes is to give you an overview. I'll also explain what is Microsoft doing with respect to this standards implementation, how we have implemented the standard, and I'll do some demos so that you get a feel of how you can get started with that. And in the end, I'll share a bunch of resources. So some guidance around how you can start building scenarios. And I'll talk about some top scenarios that we are hearing from customers and partners. So with that, let me get to the first slide and start by explaining to you what we are hearing from customers, because that sets the stage for the whole talk. And I'm going to talk about three personas. As if you see the slide and try to relate to some of the bullets that I have on my slide. Let's start with an individual persona and just try to reflect back on what you do in your daily life today. If you look at your daily life, be it personal or professional life, identity is in the core of everything. You would use identity at work, identity at home. You will use it across apps, services, devices, when you order food, when you book a ticket, or when you're checking in a hotel. But as an individual, I'm always concerned. I'm sharing my identity with an application. What is happening to my privacy control? Few months back, when there was news around WhatsApp changing the privacy controls, even I was thinking about should I move to an application called Signal? Maybe that way my data, my I'll have control on the privacy of what I'm sharing. This is something I think each one of us can relate to. And if I ask you another question, uh, do you know in the last 7 days how many websites that you have browsed? How many websites were asking you for your credentials? It is difficult for an individual to get that kind of a data. So as an individual, I'm concerned about privacy. Now let's look at the second persona. Uh, the second persona is around organization. Let's say some of you are managing your enterprise application environment. And if your CIO tells you, hey, Rohit, by next Monday, I want you to onboard 1400 new apps, make it single sign on aware so that my employees can access those apps. As an organization admin, I would say, oh, yeah, it is just a set of clicks. But is it just a set of clicks? You need to also define the data sharing boundary. What will be shared with these apps? And I said 1400. But just imagine if you have to use your identity across apps. So it's something that as an organization you need to think about. You also need to think about how would you reduce the risk exposure to data sharing? How would you comply to data governance or data sovereignty, like things like GDPR? If I am in a financial institution, how would I support scenarios like KYC, AML? So that's the second scenario or second persona. As a government, there's another set of challenges. Uh, Government deals with ensuring that they would offer services to citizens, residents. They also need to support asylum seekers. They also need to make sure they can manage cross-border and the agency traffic that goes on the border. How they can be socially and financially inclusive to everyone. So these were some of the asks that we have been hearing. And Microsoft has been working in this space for the last 4 years. And I'm going to talk to you through now what we have implemented. And so this was why this is important. So uh, Microsoft is contributing and participating in decentralized identity forum. We believe a standard space decentralized identity system can unlock a new set of experiences that can give great control over great control to user to their data. They know that what they are sharing, what they know, what kind of trust and security is there in the setups, and it delivers a high degree of trust across apps, devices, and service providers. So as a person, as an individual, I have a right to my identity. I control my identity. I can securely store elements of my identity, and I can preserve my privacy. So keeping these fundamentals in mind, can I make sure my credential is verifiable? It's coming from a trusted source. As a user, I know where I am sharing my credentials, so there is transparency and there is convenience. I can see where I shared it, so there is an activity log that is available to me, and this is what we have implemented. I've been talking about some of these concepts. Let me explain to you how does this work. And let's start correlating with our current scenario. Let's say Woodgrove is your employer and you have an employee card, you have an employee ID, you have a digital login ID from your Woodgrove organization. Let's say FabricHam is an application. What will happen in the current scenario in a centralized world? There will be some trust created between Woodgrove and FabricHam through federation or some you'll set up that trust. And FabricHam is just one case. But if I have to use my identity across various apps, as an IT admin, I need to make sure there is some trust boundary available for those apps. I need to make sure those apps are federated to my enterprise store so that my users can access. I can bring in the right authorization control. But let's look at it what works in the decentralized identity world. So in a decentralized identity setup, we talk about three actors. It's a three-actor story. You have an issuer, you have a holder, which is the user, and then you have the verifier. And let me just now explain this with an example. Let's say Woodgrove is my employer and user is me. And FabricHam could be a website where I can supply my credential and get a discount. So all in what FabricHam is expecting me is to show a valid employee card that can say, this is my title, I am employed at Woodgrove since XXX years. So how will we look at this in decentralized identity world? So as a user, I will request a verifiable credential to the issuer. As an issuer of the credential, I need to attest the user who is reaching out to me is a valid user. And there are various ways to do that attestation, and I'll explain that. Now, once I get the verifiable credential, I'll store that credential as a user in my wallet. And now I'm ready to present that credential to FabricHam. So user would sign that verifiable presentation with its decentralized identity of identifier, and it sends it to the verifier. Verifier would validate that credential. It'll do a set of steps to validate that credential, and I'll explain that. And the verifier would then, based on successful verification, will accept that credential and give the right access to the user. So let's just do a double click on what I just explained. So as a issuer, when I received a request from the user, now who is the issuer? Issuer is an organization that would create an issuing solution. It'll look for whether a user is a valid user. It'll go through a set of, you can define an attestation flow like, if you are a valid user, please go to an OIDC provider and get yourself authenticated. Or I could say that, hey, you're reaching out to me. I need you to do an identity proofing model. You need to supply your driving license or selfie. And once the identity proofing and validation process is done, I will attest you, and then I will give you the verifiable credential. And in that verifiable credential, there will be claims, claims like my title, my name, I'm employed since, And if you look at the diagram, there are some yellow highlights. So the verifiable credentials is signed by the issuer's key. It is issued to a subject, which is the yellow highlighted line. And you can see that the second yellow highlighted line talks about the signature of the issuer. The issuer would submit its public key on a distributed ledger. Now, as a user, when I receive that credential, I will store that credential in my wallet. Uh, so whenever I am in need of providing a proof of my employment to, let's say, get a discount at Fabricam, I will use this verifiable credential. So as a user, I store this credential. I also have my own decentralized identifier. Now, let's say I'm ready to use that and I'll go to Fabricam. So Fabricam will generate a presentation request. That verified is a company which could be your relying party. As in your traditional terms, you would know this very well. And as a user, when I'm trying to, let's say, order an equipment or I'm trying to get some discount, Fabricam will use open standards such as SIOP and presentation exchange to request you for credential. It'll look for who has issued that credential. So look at the yellow highlights that are there in the second block. Uh, it will validate the issuer's signature. It will validate the subject's signature. And for validation, it will do a lookup of the public key material on the ledger. Once the validation is done, the user gets successful access to the application. So that's how this whole concepts work. I just gave a very high level view. We will be double clicking on this concept, and I'll do some demos as well. I would request if you have any questions, please do post it on the chat. And if you want to unmute, please unmute and ask questions as well. So I explained how this concept works. Let me just explain on the open standards. As I said, Microsoft is actively collaborating with members of the Decentralized Identity Foundation, the W3C Credential Community Group, and the wider identity community. We have implemented these standards in form of Azure AD Verifiable Credentials. So what are the standards that we have implemented? We have implemented W3C decentralized identifiers. We have implemented W3C verifiable credential, diff site tree, and I'll explain what is site tree. We have implemented diff well-known DIT configuration, DIT SIA, presentation exchange, and so on. So now I just talked about standards. Is there any reference I can use to read more about it? Yes, there is a link that I have on the slide that you can use to read more about it. But let me just give you an overview on a very high level. So decentralized identifier, the W3 standard that I spoke about, are IDs that users would create, own, and control. And DIDs, if I use as the short form, are unique identifiers. These are global linked to DPKI metadata. And you will see that it's in the form of a JSON document that will have information around public key material. It'll have information around service endpoint and authentication descriptors. The distributed ledger or the decentralized system that I'm talking about, we use something called IAN. IAN is Identity Overlay Network. It's a layer 2 open permissionless network based on a purely deterministic protocol site tree, which sits on top of the Bitcoin layer. So it requires no special token, trusted validators, or any other consensus mechanism. There is an open source NPM package for IAN. If you want to run your own IAN node, you can surely do that. And there is some guidance also available on our website. And I'll explain to you how it works and what it is all about. If you see the screen in the middle, there is a standard called as user agent. The user agent, Microsoft's implementation is Authenticator app. So you can think of Authenticator app being a wallet which allows the user to use the decentralized identities and verifiable credentials. So it is your presentation layer. It'll facilitate issuance, storing, verification processes. And Then there are other components like universal resolver. Um, think of universal resolver like a DNS service. If I go back to the previous diagram, in the previous diagram, uh, verifier was trying to do a lookup of the public key material. Which component facilitates that lookup? It is the resolver, because the resolver, you can think of, as I said, resolver like a DNS naming service in the DID world. It'll help getting to the right DID document. Now there are a few more objects that you can see in the slide. Uh, we have something called as Identity Hub. It is still in the working implementation stages. You can think of storing consent and metadata like a personal data store for the user. And then I spoke about the SIAP protocol. So these are some of the standards. Now let me just map these standards to the components that you would see on the Azure AD side. If you're interested to know more about these standards, I would encourage you to join DEF. And there is a link that I have in this slide deck that points you to that. So let me just now map to the standards, how we have implemented that. As I said, DIDs or decentralized identifiers are IDs that the users create. Um, I spoke about IAN. IAN is a layer 2 open permissionless network. We use the method did colon IAN. Um, and I spoke about the user agent. Our implementation is the Authenticator app. There is no special version of the Authenticator app. The Microsoft Authenticator app that you get in Play Store and App Store has the wallet SDK implemented in it. As you start using verifiable credential, you will see that if you are using Microsoft Authenticator today and you have not used Azure DVC till date, if you go to the settings tab, you will find there's a toggle available in the app settings. Then I spoke about resolver, the universal resolver. Uh, our implementation, as I said, is an API that connects to our IAN node to do lookup and resolve DIDs using the did IAN method. And it returns the did documents, the DDOs that we talk about. What is in the DDOs? If you remember, I mentioned we have your information around authentication context, you have service endpoints, public keys, and I'll show you that as we do the demo. Then we have the Azure AD Verifiable Credentials service. It's an issuance and verification API and open source SDK for W3C verifiable credentials that are signed with DIN method. So it enables you to it enables you to generate, present, and verifiable claims. I'll have an architecture diagram to explain to you how and where it participates. So it forms the basis of trust between the users and the system. So that's the implementation. And now let me take you to the screens and the interfaces that you would see. So starting with on the Azure portal, you will see verifiable credential service listed under uh, um, security tab under Azure Active Directory, and we'll do that walk through a demo. You can onboard verifiable credential service. You need to be either a global admin or the authentication policy administrator to onboard this service. For now, to onboard this service, you need just one P2 license in your tenant. It need not be assigned to a user. It doesn't need to be assigned to a user. You just need one P2 license to be available in your tenant. Azure AD P2 license, premium P2 license. And from the portal, you can then onboard the service, verify the domain. And there is a reason why I'm talking about verification of the domain. Then you can create credentials. Credentials, when they are created, it helps you define a definition. How my card would look like. So if you see the first screenshot, it's a black card with some labels. What kind of attestation should be followed? So there is something called as rules file. In the rules file, you define that flow, whether it will be self-issued or you are following an OIDC flow. Uh, And I think I would request if I think let me just control the slide deck. Someone try to take the control. Let me go back.
Yes, sorry, Rohit. Is there any issue?
I think no worries. I think somebody tried to take a control of the slide deck. Um,
Okay, we are good now.
yeah, we're good. All right. So I was talking about the Microsoft implementation. So on the Azure portal, we have the verifiable credential service. So there are two files that are important: rules file and the display file. In the rules file, you define that flow, like will it be self-issued or you are doing an OIDC flow. Uh, you can choose Azure AD or B2C or any third-party OIDC provider for that flow, or you could do self-issued, like let's say for some scenarios you may want user to punch in some data, or you could use something called as ID token int, and I'll explain that too. Display file explains how the card would look like. So that's the issuer interface. Then in the middle we have developer tools. So we have the SDK. The public sample is available. We'll do a quick walkthrough, and then we'd also have APIs. We'll be doing announcement of the public APIs very soon. So the APIs it'll be like one API for issuance, one API for verification, and then we talk about the wallet, the Microsoft Authenticator app wallet. So that's the implementation. Now, so before I move to the next section, I just want to show you some surveys that we did, and then let's do a demo. So in the initial slide, I spoke about three personas. So we reached out to some 3,000 customers, and we were trying to understand what kind of scenarios they are looking for with what this decentralized identity concept. And the top three scenarios that came to us in response were: can you make sure that onboarding for employees, contractors, and customers can be done quickly? Uh, Once they are onboarded, can I give them secure access to critical apps? And thirdly, can we make self-service account recovery using this model? And to implement these scenarios, can you make this safe so that there is no custom integration, there is no PII handshake, there's no need to store the PII? Can you make it fast, and can you make it easy? So these were some feedbacks that we received, and I just shared some percentage numbers what we heard from the service. So the first demo that I'm going to show you today is about an onboarding scenario. Think of your onboarding that happened to you, and I can then correlate to what happened to me when I joined Microsoft 14 years ago. Uh, I was told, hey, you're offered a job in Microsoft. Please make sure you carry this email with you as a printout. You are required to carry a photocopy of one of your government issued documents. Somebody will be there to escort you at the gate. Somebody will then reach out to you at the reception. They will take that particular photocopy from you, and then somebody will escort you to the floor. That was my onboarding experience. That was 14 years ago, and I'm guessing a lot of it is still there today. If I look at what HR does, HR also has to do a lot of verification steps, like they have to do background verification, they have to make sure the employees is onboarded in a right way, there is a smooth onboarding. They have to make sure that the manager has all the right data, IT is able to give access to that person. So there are so many steps that happens in onboarding. Can we make this better? So I'm going to show you through this demo. If you look at the flow talks about a user getting a notification. It could be through email, a user going through an onboarding journey where the user scans and uploads a driving license. Some validation happens on that driving license and selfie, and then user gets a verifiable card. And then the journey continues for the user. So let me share my screen and let me show you this step. For this demo, I'm also going to do phone mirroring. So let me bring my browser. All right, and let me also do the phone mirroring. All right, so All right. Okay. So, uh, so think of the onboarding scenario slide that I showed to you. And in that email, there was a link that was sent to me to kickstart my onboarding. So as a user, I received this email. I clicked on the get started flow. Just assume that I'm Matthew Michael. The flow here is, as a user, I will supply uh, a government issued document. I'll take a selfie, and I'll then use that verifiable credential for my onboarding. So as Matthew Michael, I was given this link. I haven't done the verification yet, so I'll do my verification. For our solution, we have integrated with 8 partners. These are well-known partners, and you can see details about it on our public site. I'll share the link in the end. As a user, I'm going to go through this onboarding journey. True identity is one of the demo identifiers that identity verification solutions that we have. So what it is saying, hey Matthew, take a selfie. And for the purpose of this demo, just assume this is me. I'm not going to share my driving license with you, all of you on the recording, but just to show you how this works. So I uploaded my DL. Now when I click on next to initiate the identity verification flow, the application, the provider will do the validation. It'll do OCR check and all that validation against the government database. And then it'll say, okay, verification complete. Now you can accept a verifiable credential from me. At this moment, you can imagine the new hire does not have any ID, but I still want to secure this transaction. So just make sure the view is full. Yeah, I'll scan the QR code. And for remote signing process, I have punched in, I've asked the user to supply a PIN, and the PIN was validated, and I could then I can add the credential on my wallet. As a user, now I can look at the credential info. So I was talking about the element of transparency. And you can see under credential info, the details from my DL were picked using OCR and were stamped as attributes in the verifiable credential. Now, I would go back to my onboarding portal and say, I have done my verification. So as an employer, I would say, okay, if you have done your verification, please show me the true ID card. So I'll just scan the QR code. It can be a QR code. It could be a deep link as well. If you're using a mobile browser, it could be a deep link based on the platform. I'll click on allow. As a user, you saw the user got a notification that the application is asking your identity. And now you can see the payload was presented on successful verification. The details from the payload were my first name, my last name, my address. And you can think of now the application can take this payload. It can then trigger a activity on my HR system to create an account for me, which can then flow back and also then create an Azure AD ID for me. So as a user, I can go to the recent activity tab, and you can look at the recent transactions that have happened using my credential. Now, the application is saying, hey, thank you for presenting your credential. Would you like to have a digital version of your employee card? So I can scan this QR code. And at this moment too, I don't know my username and password, but I can use my employee ID as a PIN. So I'll just supply the PIN, click on add, and now I have my employee ID, and I can look at my credential details by clicking on credential info. Now, what will happen as a next step? My next task would be maybe get a laptop from IT. In this example, you can see there are some applications that I have. Let me just use the prosphere.com site to order a hardware. And this could be a non-federated app. So what this app is saying, hey, these are the listed price, but if you need a corporate discount, I would like you to supply your employee card. You can build this new experience. So instead of using the traditional way of supplying email address and password, I can just scan the QR code. You can see the application and the user sees the application is asking the user for a verified employee card. I can hit on allow. And once this is successfully validated, I will see a change on the application side. So let's just wait to give it a second. It's just warming up. All right, so you can see the application a request was approved. You might have noticed a toast on a notification on the Authenticator app, and the corporate discounts were applied. So this was a quick demo on onboarding. So now let me go back to the deck, and let me now present the slide deck. Since I'm on a full screen view, let me just go through the full screen view itself. Okay, so what you saw was an experience where I was onboarded, then I got secure access to the application. You can also build scenarios where you can uh, do self-service account recovery. So can I use my driving license to reset my enterprise password? You can use this kind of a model. How all these is getting stitched up together? So if you look at this diagram, this is a high-level architecture diagram. The the bottom layer talks about the Azure AD VC issuance service. Then we talk about the gray block, which is where you have your Azure subscription, you created the verifiable credential, you are using the services like Key Vault to store the issuer keys, the sign-in, recovery, and update keys. Then you have a storage account, which is hosting the credential files, the rules files, and the display file. And as a user, I use my wallet. And on the right hand side, you see, if you remember to the demo that I showed to you, the first demo was we went to the onboarding application. The second demo was we went to the ProSphere application. So that's my relying party. On the relying party, based on the process, I have defined a logic. If you give me the right payload, if I'm able to verify your verifiable credential, I will then trigger the business logic, which was applying corporate discount. So you could use this block diagram to understand the basic components. Let me just now explain the architecture flow, and then we will do another demo. So what you saw from the demo, we supplied our photo, we uploaded our driving license, it triggered a validation process, and then once the ISV was able to do the validation, it generated a QR code. I was able to scan the QR code on my wallet. But what happens in the background? So as a user, I will go to my issuer. So that's step number one. I will go to the web front end for an request that, hey, I need a verifiable credential. So verifiable, the issuer web front end will reach out to the Azure AD VC service to generate the issuance request for the user. So in step number one, the user might have supplied some details. In step number two, the issuer web front end reaches out to the Azure AD VC service to generate a issuer request or the issuance request. In response, the issuer web front end gives a QR code or a deep link to the user. So if it's a QR code, the user can then scan the QR code. It's a deep link, could be based on the platform if you're using the mobile app. In the QR code, when the user scans the QR code, which is step number 4, from the wallet, the user is capturing some details from the request. The DID number, the DID identifier for the issuer, the credential contract details, and things like logo, icon, and all that. Now, what it does as a part of step number 5, it validates. Is it a valid issuer? Once it is done, it does a lookup to the IAN network to get to that particular issuer's DID number and check, oh, yeah, I'm getting the request from the issuer. Then it also looks at the contract. It also does a domain name validation. Looking when it gets a response back from the IAN, it gets it gets a response in the form of a JSON document, and in that document there is a service endpoint value like contoso.com is mapped to is the service endpoint for did at IN 12345, for example. So it does the issuer own that particular domain, and it does that domain verification, and then it loads the contract, it goes through the attestation flow. In my demo, it was take a selfie, upload a driving license, and then the service will do the magic of validating you. But you could also build an OIDC flow that, hey, you need to go to an IDP provider, go get yourself authenticated, get me back the ID token, and then I will take the claims from the ID token. So that could be something that can be built as well. And I'll show you a demo as well for that. Now, once the issuer does all that validation, and the last step would be the user will accept that credential and store it in the wallet. So that's the flow for issuance. What happens in presentation? In the presentation flow, uh, now, if you remember the ProSwear demo, uh, I had my verifiable credential in my wallet. I went to the ProSwear site. So as a user, as a holder, I am ready to access some function on a relying party. So the relying party would generate a presentation request for me. And it does that by reaching out to the Azure AD VC service to generate the presentation request. The user will see a QR code, which is step number 3, or a deep link, as I said. In that deep link or QR code, what's there in that request? It's a standard presentation exchange request. One of the standards that I mentioned in the initial part of my slide. And then it validates whether the verifier is the DID I see from the verifier, is it a valid DID number for the verifier? So it does that validation. It then supplies back the payload, the subject DID, and also mentions the RP's DID as a part of the audience. So once it is presented to the relying party will take that information, validate that credential, and that's the second blue arrow that you see. It looks at whether it was issued by the right issuer by doing a public key lookup, doing a validation, and it looks at the user's information. And when, as a user, when I am going to the relying party, I'm giving the pairwise did I have to the relying party. So think of the thing I was explaining, privacy is important here. So as Rohit, when I am presenting my verifiable credential to application A, I have a pairwise DID to application A. But as I go to application B, I will have my another pairwise DID to application D. So a user can have more than one DIDs as well. So what are DIDs? If you remember, these are decentralized identifiers. So an actor can have more than one DIDs, and these are globally unique identifiers. So that's the presentation flow. So let me just now show you another demo. Let me go to the second example. And this time, let me bring up my phone again. I think the phone mirroring had ended. Let me just bring that again. So in this flow, I will show you a demo around an enterprise scenario where, as a user, I was told to complete a training so that I can get access to a dashboard. So that's the demo that I will show now. Let me just make sure the resolution is okay. So, and this is a separate Woodgrove setup. So as a user, this could be a normal thing I would do. Let me just punch in my. So I'm logging to my enterprise portal. So now the experience could be the employer is saying, hey, would you like to accept the Woodgrove employee card? And I can scan this QR code. And there is a reason why I'm showing you this demo. So please note the screens that you're seeing on the Authenticator app. So remember, I mentioned when the wallet is accepting the request, it also does a DNS validation. So gave me some error, but it's saying, okay, you can see on the top, it says the domain is not verified. Now in this flow, you see I have an IDP authentication flow, which is user is asked to authenticate against a directory. Let me just specify the credential. I'll say continue. And this user was successfully authenticated, and I was able to the Woodgrove verified employee card. And in this demo, you can see the details I have for me, my first name, my last name, my email. Now, the demo was that I have a digital employee card, but I need to access this AI dashboard. When I click on this AI dashboard, the application is saying, hey, did you complete your AI engineers training? If you haven't done that, please go and complete the AI engineers training first. So I'll go to my, let me log in again to the, I'll go to my learning management solution. And this in this case is the Contoso University. And there is an AI engineering training. So I'll click on the AI engineering course. So the university is saying, please tell me that you are a Woodgrove employee. And I'll present my Woodgrove employee card. And now the application was able to validate me. And as a user, I can see that I have used this card against the Contoso University. Now I can click on begin exam. I can complete my exam. And once I complete this training, the learning management application is saying, hey, now would you like to accept a digital credential transcript of the training that you have just completed? So I'll just go through this acceptance flow. I'll click on add. And now I have my verified AI engineer training transcript as well. And in this, it just have information around when it was issued to and what's the expiration date for the credential. Now I'll go back to my AI dashboard. And when I try to access this AI dashboard, and this is another kind of experience that you will see. Now this application is saying to me, you need to show me that you have completed the training. You also need to show me that you're a Woodgrove employee. So I'll scan this QR code and you will see on the screen that during the presentation request, when I reviewed the presentation request, wallet was asked, do you have the AI engineer card and verified employee card in your wallet? If yes, please allow the application to uh, view it. So let me just click on OK. Okay, I think there was a small glitch, but I think you get the gist of things here. So the application was able to refresh it and was able to get the payload from the wallet. And there were some errors in the demo. There's a reason I showed this demo with errors, because I want to show you how the wallet works and what are the things it checks in the background. So the first demo was onboarding. The second demo was training. You can build demos where, let's say this is in a third demo I want to show you. This is where I am already using an application which is a federated application. And as a part of my authentication, I get these claims. So I can actually use this kind of a flow as well to let me just sign into this application to show you this demo. And this is a standard application we have built using our MSAL sample that we have on our GitHub repo. So I'm signing in. And as a part of the ID token, I see these are the claims that I have. I can use the claims in my ID token and stamp those values. Plus also I have an option called as self-attested. These are the information details I am supplying, and then pass these claims as ID token in. So you can build this kind of an experience as well. So let me just bring in my phone again, and let me scan this QR code. So when I click on add, this time there was no PIN, there was no ID token, IDP flow, because I'm already authenticating against a website, and you can see the claim values. This is another scenario that can be implemented. Now I can just click on this verify VC, and I want to show you the did document. So let me just scan this QR code for the presentation flow. And if I show you the presentation experience, it is looking for the sign-in expert card in my wallet. And the QR code was successfully scanned, the user was validated, and the payload had information like my display name, last name, and the self-attested values that I sort of specified, my title and my language. There's something I have in my presentation, which is the did document. So there's a tool that has been built where you can review the details for a DID or a did identifier. So uh, the subject did that was supplied, you can just pass that value on the credential, and you can see the details of it. Now let's go to the Azure portal. On the Azure portal, as I was explaining, so you will find this under Azure Active Directory, security, verifiable credential preview, and you will onboard this service. And then you can go about creating a credential. Uh, Credential is all about how my card would look like and what are the rules that are there for the attestation flow. Once the credential is created, I was referring to some terms like contract. So this is the contract. So if you click on this manifest URL, you can see this is the request that the wallet will download. It'll have details like how my card should look like, the background color, issued by, text color, what are the claims, and then how do I map those claims. So when I clicked on credential info, you saw some labels, right? Family name, it maps to family underscore name. So those are the things that you will specify. You then specify what would be my configuration URI. So I'm saying in this case, I would want the user to go and authenticate against an Azure AD OIDC endpoint. So likewise, in my setup, I have few more examples, and you can find some more details on our public documentation. And I leave a link in the end. So you can configure the verifiable credentials. You can always start with the sample node app. This is the GitHub repo where you can download the issuer and the verifier node sample. Then there are sample websites. In this sample, we are using the Azure AD B2C instance for the IDP flow. But you can replace it with your Azure AD instance as well, and that's covered under step 1 and step 2. Now, let me go back to the deck. I'm looking at the time, so I have 12 minutes. So let me just go back to the deck and complete some of the demo experiences that I showed. Now, my second demo, you saw some errors, right? So let's just go through why were those errors. So if you remember this slide, what we did, the issuer signed the credential using its key, using its private key, and the public hash of the public key was supplied to the public ledger. Uh, as a user, when I accepted the credential, I also signed that credential with my key. And when I am ready to present, the verifier would look at that verifiable credential and then will validate the issuer as well as the subject information using the public key lookup, doing the PGP magic, and then validating that credential, and then downloading that payload. And based on that payload, you will build your business process logic. So the first thing that you need to know, I've been talking about the documents. So if you look at the first line, so the resolver will help you do a lookup based on the data identifier. The response of the document I showed you through the identity.foundation tool. I'll share the link in the end. The JSON document would look like this. It'll have the information around the identifier. It'll have the hash of the public key. So the highlight that you see here. And then there's another thing that you would see in this slide, which is the service endpoint. Now, remember this error when we were scanning the request, the wallet was giving me this message that I'm not able to verify the domain. And then we visually saw that on the authenticator console as well. So wallet would look at the date document, would look at the service endpoint. It'll look at, do you own, does the issuer own the DNS domain? And as an issuer, to own and do that mapping, you don't need to create a DNS record. As you onboard the verifiable credential service from Azure portal, it'll generate a det configuration.json file for you. You need to host that file on your root directory. So there is some guidance available on our public documentation how you can do that. So the wallet would look for the service endpoint, validate, does it map to, is there a DNS binding to the DID number? If yes, then yeah, the DNS check is done. And I was explaining
Hi,
about,
Rohit. Sorry to interrupt you. We have another 10 minutes, and if we can keep some time for questions also.
yeah,
So
yeah,
you
I'll
can.
just wrap it up in 2 minutes. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. So I was explaining about the DNS binding. So this is the JSON file that you will be hosting on your website, and this is the path that the wallet would try to look up. And you can use jot.ms to you look at that information. Um, Now, how do you go about creating the credential? I did a quick demo through my portal. So you will onboard the VC service, you will define the display and the rules file, and then you will design the verifiable credential. There are samples available for the rules file and the display file. So you can use that and then you can build on that. And then you can connect it to your instance as well. You can start with the sample, which is connecting to B2C, but then you can move it to your Azure AD or Azure B2C, AD B2C instance as well. So that's the last slide I have, which covers a bunch of resources. Let me just go back to the Teams chat and see if there are any questions. Okay, so Rahul has a question. Does it mean all partners support VC collaboration in addition to traditional modern protocols? Rahul, could you explain your question a little bit more?
Yeah, so I basically wanted to know that because right now we all have partners trust with open standards or IDC or all connections. But if we're gonna introduce the VC, the authenticator, the scanning code, and everything should be available with the other partners as well. Um, Maybe
So,
I didn't get the VCA correctly, but just some thoughts. And also, how does it help for the enterprise customers which has the on-premises credentials already in place? Would there be any requirement of still password hash sync, or can they completely migrate it to VC?
okay, great questions, Rahul. So let me answer your questions in two parts. The first question you had was, I'm very familiar with the OIDC flow. I've been setting up SAML federations with the apps. What happens to that kind of a setup? So two things. This whole flow is based on open standard, which is the OIDC flow. And what we have seen, more than 90% of the apps are using the standards model. What you just need to bring in is the issuer experience and the presentation experience. Your app may be federated, your app may not be federated. If your app is not federated, you need to use the presentation experience like the way you saw. I clicked on Prosware. It gave me a form where a user was asked to either use email or password or scan the QR code. So that's the presentation experience that a relying party needs to build. Uh, you can use the node sample, or it could be an API call, as I said, just one call to generate that deep link or QR code. And this could be the new way the apps can use. Uh, we have done close to 100 plus pilots. This service is now public preview since 5th of April. And a lot of enterprises are trying to use this for the three scenarios that I've highlighted. Remember the onboarding scenario, user does not have an account in my directory. So they cannot authenticate against the directory, but can I bring in some experience? Definitely. Uh, if I bring in that experience, like if you want to access the compliance dashboard, you need to complete the compliance training. Can I build that experience? Yes. I showed Contoso University. It could be any other. So you need to build the issuer experience. You need to build the presentation experience. and it is no rocket science. It is using open standard OIDC flow, SIOP. So one API call, and that's all it's about it. So that's very simple. So that was your first question.
Yeah,
Your
thank
second
you.
question, yeah, the second question you had was also interesting. If my enterprise is syncing objects to Azure AD, there is a password hash thing going on, is there something
Yeah,
else that I need to do, right? So just remember what I was explaining in the issuance flow. So issuance service is something that you will host or you will use somebody's service. You will define what will be my attestation flow. Attestation says, would you like your user to authenticate against a directory? If yes, is it an OIDC endpoint? So if you're using a hybrid setup, obviously Azure AD follows the OIDC model. It could be Azure AD, it could be Azure AD B2C, it could be any third-party OIDC provider. So it needs to understand OIDC. If it is an on-premise Active Directory, then you need to have some bridge that can do that OIDC translation for it. Does it help?
perfect. Understood. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Right. Okay. I'm looking at the chat. Okay, so there is a question how Azure Key Vault plays a key role in identity. So see, if you remember, the actors were using keys to sign the credential. Like issuer was using its private key to sign the credential. So Key Vault becomes a safekeeper for issuers sign in, update, and recovery key. So when you are onboarding the issuer service, uh, you will use Key Vault to store keys. At this moment, we use Azure Key Vault. Maybe in future, we'll allow you to use your own HSMs or any other service. But right now, Azure Key Vault plays a key role. It'll store the issuer's sign in, update, and recovery key. Okay. I hope I answered your question. If you think it was still partly answered or unanswered, please unmute and ask. Any more questions anybody has? If not, then maybe I'll leave you with two important things, as I was saying. Please go through the tutorial. It's a very it's a simple self-explained tutorial. You can use this sample node app. You can download the sample app, use the code as is, and then follow the documentation to connect it to your Azure AD or Azure AD B2C or any other OIDC endpoint setup. The README file explains how you can use the sample, and then you can just go about onboarding the service. So three important prerequisites. You need to have an account that has got right permissions, either authentication policy administrator or global admin. You need to make sure that you have at least one P2 license in your tenant. It need not be assigned. It will be used by the service principal name that will be the service principal account that will be used is by the Azure AD VC service. It will look for whether your tenant has a P2 license or not. And thirdly, you need to have the right permissions on Key Vault and storage account. So for storage account, you need storage blob data reader permission. For Key Vault, we have listed the Key Vault access policies on the documentation. Please make sure the prerequisites are done, and then you can onboard a credential. I still have 1 minute. Let me just give you a glimpse of how the rules and um, display file would look like. And I'll show you, I've got multiple examples. I showed you so many demos today. So the one could be, let's say, the B2C directory flow, where my rules file would say, when a user will authenticate against a B2C directory, I need to get back the name, subject, the tenant ID, email, family name, given name, country, and I'm using this client ID that is registered on my tenant for that. So remember this redirect URI, this is something what the authenticator app uses. So this is the kind of format it uses. So that's all I had. I hope you enjoyed the session. If you have any further questions, feel free to drop me an email.